Today, in the episode, fierce battles in Pokrovsk expose Putin's true goal, not territory, but empire. Stay tuned for frontline updates. Kyiv hit by waves of North Korean, Iranian, and Russian missiles and UAVs as Evil's Axis arms flow to Moscow continues. Ukraine strikes Russia's key oil hub and most protected city Novorossiysk with Long Neptune missile. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine recorded 172 combat engagements on the front over the past day. Nearly one-third of them were in the Pokrovsk direction, where Russian occupiers attacked Defense Forces positions 51 times. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy emphasized that he will fully support any decision made by the military commanders who are directly on the front line and assessing the real situation. He said this in an interview with Bloomberg Television while commenting on the extremely difficult situation Ukraine is facing in Pokrovsk. According to him, after months of fierce fighting, Russian forces are attempting to establish control over the city.
I will support our soldiers, especially commanders who are there, how they can control the situation, or it's too costly for us. The most important for us is our soldiers. Russia is seeking a victory in Pokrovsk to try and persuade Trump that Ukraine should pull out of the whole of the eastern Donbas, consisting of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, to end the war. We cannot leave eastern Ukraine. Nobody will understand that. People won't understand that. And the main thing is that nobody will guarantee you that if they seize this or that town, they won't move further. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, president of Ukraine, in an interview with Bloomberg Television.
Stabilizing the situation in the Pokrovsk-Mirnorad sector depends on the coordinated work of the military command structures and the units carrying out combat missions. This was reported by Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrskyi, following his visit to Pokrovsk. The military are focused on controlling specific areas, protecting logistics routes, and ensuring the evacuation of the wounded. The Russian army is attempting to take advantage of difficult weather conditions, conducting assault operations with small infantry groups and using light equipment. Over the past week, search and strike operations have cleared 7.4 kilometers of territory in the Pokrovsk district of enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups. There is no evidence of Russian control over the city of Pokrovsk or of an encirclement of Ukrainian forces, Syrskyi emphasized. Soldiers of the 425th Scholar Regiment are systematically neutralizing enemy forces, who are suffering significant losses in fierce fighting. Footage released by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine shows the movement of equipment, deployment of landing forces, and operations of assault groups entering the eastern part of Pokrovsk. The assault units are engaging in intense fighting near the railway, advancing to connect with positions already secured. According to the General Staff, 20 to 50 Russian soldiers are taken out of action daily. Pokrovsk have shown that for Putin, the war in Ukraine is not about territory, but about imperial ambitions, writes the Wall Street Journal. Analysts note that even before the full-scale war, in his essay, he claimed that Ukrainians and Russians are one people, and that Ukraine itself is Lenin's creation. On the eve of the full-scale invasion, he repeated this in an address. The Russian leader saw the collapse of the USSR as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. For him, the war is an attempt to rewrite history and restore Russia's status as a power equal to the United States, the publication notes.
Ukrainian defenders in Pokrovsk, the town was already in ruins, with bodies lying along the streets. This brutal battle demonstrates the Kremlin's true goal, not just to seize Donbas, but to restore Russia's influence in Ukraine and return Moscow to great power status. Despite the efforts of U.S. President Donald Trump, who has called on the sides to stop the killing and tried to seek a compromise on the territories, the White House's peace initiative is stalling. As analysts have noted, Putin is not bargaining for territories, but is fighting over history, symbols, and the restoration of the Russian Empire, from the Wall Street Journal publication.
What is terrorism? Terrorism, in its broadest sense, is the use of violence against non-combatants to achieve political or ideological aims. And this is exactly what Russia is doing. Hypersonic missiles and all kinds of drones launched by Russia were directed at Ukraine, mainly Kyiv, tonight. The civilian housing area was hit intentionally, in a manner consistent with actions typically associated with attacks on non-combatants. Obviously, Putin's idea is as simple as it is criminal: to demoralize Ukrainians, to make them say that ending a war in a way Putin wants is still ending the war, which is a lie. We hear those voices often, like Viktor Orban, Hungary's prime minister's voice that resonates to the Kremlin narratives. Do not support Ukraine. Stop arming it and the war stops. What about those who died tonight, burnt alive in their own beds in their homes in Kyiv? What about those who died, men, women, and children, murdered by Russia in the course of 4 years of criminal Russian aggression? Putin and those Orbans around the world want us to stop the war in a way when it turns out to be our own fault that it has started in the first places. Some say Putin recently stated he is ready to negotiate with Ukraine. Well, here is how. The Ukrainian Air Force's radio tech troops have detected and tracked a total of 449 airborne assault targets over the past 24 hours, including 19 missiles, 14 of which were successfully intercepted. Among the missiles were Russian-made Iskander-M and Iskander-K, caliber, Kh-47M2, Kinzhal, Zircon, as well as North Korean KN-23 missiles. In addition, 430 drones of various types were recorded, including around 300 Iranian-made Shaheds, with 405 of them neutralized. Other drones included Russian-made Gerber units and UAVs using Chinese components. Strikes from missiles and 23 attack drones were confirmed at 13 locations, while debris from downed targets fell across 44 sites. China is significantly financing Russia's military efforts, which increases the threat to European security and poses a challenge to NATO. Finland's defense minister Antti Häkkänen said in an interview with AFP. He noted that Moscow's cooperation with Beijing has gone so far that China is now funding Putin's military budget. Meanwhile, China stated that Beijing has never supplied weapons to either side in the war in Ukraine and has no intention of tolerating attempts by the G7 to place blame on China. As is known, foreign ministers of the Group of 7 countries said they are considering new measures of pressure on nations that assist the aggressor. They condemned military aid to Russia from North Korea and Iran, as well as the supply of weapons and dual-use components, in particular from China, which they said is a key factor enabling Russia's war. China's foreign ministry rejected the accusations, stating that the international community is once again ignoring the facts and distorting the truth. China's exports to Russia in yuan showed the sharpest decline in the past 8 months in October. Bilateral trade is being pressured by slowing demand and issues caused by Western sanctions, Reuters reports. Analysts estimate that shipments to Russia fell by 22% compared to the previous year, totaling over $8.5 billion. This marks the 7th consecutive month of decline. In September, exports dropped by more than 21%. Trade dynamics between Beijing and Moscow are weakening despite efforts by both sides to shield it from external pressure, Reuters says. By the end of 2025, Russia aims to employ around 12,000 North Korean workers at enterprises in the Alabuga Special Economic Zone, where long-range drones used against Ukraine are manufactured. Workers are promised $2.5 per hour for 12-hour shifts. This highlights the deepening cooperation between the two dictatorships to continue the war against Ukraine. The Russian finance ministry borrowed a record amount in just one day, nearly 2 trillion rubles, the Moscow Times reports. This is due to a hole in the budget, which could reach almost 6 trillion rubles by the end of the year. The publication notes that the budget situation is becoming increasingly tense. Spending is already 21% higher, primarily due to a decline in oil and gas revenues. Russia has started selling oil at record discounts, the Moscow Times reports. The price cuts are linked to U.S. sanctions imposed on Russia's two largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. As of November 10th, discounts on the Urals grade in the ports of Primorsk and Novorossiysk reached nearly $19.50 per barrel, compared to around $13 to $14 at the beginning of the month. Before the sanctions were imposed, the discount was even lower, at $11 to $12 per barrel. President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, reported that Russia is rapidly losing oil production, following a briefing by the head of the Foreign Intelligence Service, Ole Ivashenko. Zelenskyy noted that this year, for the first time since the full-scale war began, there is a noticeable decline in the processing of Russian fuel. The Ukrainian president also thanked partners who are delivering targeted strikes on enemy oil fleet vessels. As a result, the Russians have started using fewer tankers.
By the end of this year, Russia will lose at least $37 billion in budgeted oil and gas revenues. Russian oil companies and the energy sector will lose tens of billions more. All of this is constraining Russia's military machine. Both traditional sanctions against Russia and Ukraine's long-range sanctions are proving effective. Directions for further sanctions pressure have also been identified. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
The Security Service of Ukraine and Ukrainian armed forces struck the Novorossiysk oil terminal, Russia's second-largest oil export hub. Oil loading racks, pipeline infrastructure, and pumping units were damaged, and a major fire is ongoing at the site. Air defense positions at military unit there were also hit, causing detonations. The operation included the launch of a Ukrainian long-range cruise missile, Long Neptune, which struck one of Russia's most heavily protected targets. As a result, a state of emergency has been declared in Novorossiysk. According to Reuters, Transneft has halted oil flows through the port, highlighting the serious impact of the strike. Thank you for watching News Digest. Stay informed, stay sharp, and take care. See you in the next update.